Welcome to another episode of Small Astrology, where we are looking at how to look at your child's birth chart and use it for some little tips on the sort of person you are dealing with. So, we are starting with sun signs, and this one is for the small Gemini sun. So, Gemini is a mutable air sign. So these little small Geminis are talkative, intelligent, but also very moody. You know, we find them blah blah blah, chatty chatty chatty. They want to talk about everything. It is important to remember that they do need you to listen to what they have to say, okay? And that is everything. They want you to think that everything they say is important and that you will give them all of your attention, okay? Now, they do like to talk about everything they see, everything they hear, stories they've picked up from other people, everything. Gemini is a very curious sign, so they do take in a lot of things around them. They will see a lot of things that you may miss, and these are things that they will want to talk to you about, okay? Now, without an attentive listener around, you'll find that the small Gemini sun will get a little bit panicky, will feel sometimes a little bit lonely without an attentive listener around. So this can sometimes cause them to embellish stories just to keep people interested in what they've got to say, because of course they know that these feelings of loneliness and panic do come up if nobody is listening to them. So just be aware of that if they are embellishing their stories, that could very well be a sign that they feel like that there are not any attentive listeners around. Now, Gemini is the symbol of one of the most volatile and unstable of people, okay? This is because their mood can change 100 times a day. We are dealing with Gemini. The reason that they are seen as the twins is because of this ability to shift backwards and forwards and sit in either polarity, okay? So this is the sort of child with their busy, busy mind that is likely to disassemble things to find out how it works and then does not really have the patience to put that back together. All right, they often walk and talk very early on because they do have a strong desire to interact with people, including strangers, which might, as a caregiver, make you a little bit nervous, okay? Because they are very intelligent, they are very talented and very eloquent. And it's important that you notice this level of dignity that they have about themselves in the very early stages of their life, okay, the very early years of their life, so that you can help them develop this diligence and this eloquence that they need to have, all right? Now, they are completely unpredictable, all right? So just be ready if you have a small Gemini for just the eternal change of taste, all right? And looks and ways of presenting themselves, because they are very curious and they will like to move from hobby to hobby, from long hair to short hair. They'll want to change things about them, the way that they dress, quite a lot. They're very curious that way. All right, so they can get very carried away, but again, being the twin, they can cool down also very quickly. All right, they don't really become attached to a place or to people because they can make friends wherever they go. All right, and you know, they're not as concerned when they're small of having like deep bond friends. They want to have lots of different friends because they are quite changeable. So they tend to be the sort of child who will have a range of friends that they can go and play with depending on how they are feeling, all right? Now, they do have the ability to become leaders, but they often will just get bored of that idea and move on to something else. So when you are looking at investing in things for things that they like or hobbies that they like, try not to get super attached to that being something they're going to want to do for a long period of time, and really think about how much money you are going to be spending on said hobby or said new like, because a Gemini sun child is very likely to change their mind very quickly. So you might find, oh, I like painting, you get them a whole painting set up, and then 2 weeks later, no, they don't like painting, okay? So they are a little bit cheeky because they are unwilling to obey anyone else's will. They are very hard to be able to get them to do something that they do not want to do. And if the situation calls for them to be forced to do something that they do not want to do, they will see that as them doing you a huge favor. Okay, so keep that in mind. Also, keep in mind that their aesthetic that they present and the way that they see their own beauty is very important. So while we are thinking about how changeable they are, that doesn't mean don't support them. It really means be ready to support whatever they want, okay? Particularly as they start growing older and they start wanting to change their hair and change their looks. It's very important that you stay on board with that because it is very important to them, their aesthetic and the way that they present, all right? Now, they can do lots of things at once as well, Gemini, twin brain, okay? So they can be listening to music and doing homework. They can be talking on the phone while they're doing something else. So try not to over police that as well. I mean, obviously as a parent, you need to make sure that they aren't skipping out on details of homework and stuff like that, but do be aware that their brain does have the capacity to do more than one thing at a time. Okay, they can be easily distracted though. So if it is a monotonous, painstaking task or job, they will find that quite difficult. So try not to give them boring things to do because it will be pointless. They are likely to just get up and move on, okay, with that curious mind. They are not going to be able to sit there and do that boring task, all right? This is like a child that might have a lot of projects started, but none finished, because halfway through that project, they get inspired by it to start something else and off they go. This is the child with bookmarks in 10 books in their room, all right? The only thing that will prompt them to finish a task is the interest in what the end of the story is and the interest in what the end project will look like. If they do not have an interest in that or they lose that halfway through, they're not going to finish it, all right? Now, because of the busyness of the mind, a Gemini child and also into adulthood as well. The neuroses and insomnia, very common, all right? And this is because of emotional overload. Now, this comes from a lot of places, one of which a lot of their curious and cheeky behavior is often seen as them just being silly or naughty. And a lot of the time, it's an emotional overload that's happening. And that's why they're kind of acting out in that silly, kind of overly playful, little bit naughty, little bit cheeky way. And if we aren't aware of that, these emotional overloads will just keep building. And in adulthood and going through our teenage years, this can actually lead to some psychological problems. And I, for one, and if you know me and you've seen me talk about Gemini, there are a lot of adult Geminis that have not had this looked after because we were not aware of this sort of information growing up. And so you do find that there are a lot of psychological problems when it comes to Gemini because these sorts of behaviors that were actually presentations of an emotional overload were just overlooked as someone who was like a quirky, fun, curious kid, all right? So you do need to be extra aware of that if you have a Gemini sun child, okay? One of the things that they do need to be taught from a young age is self-control and self-discipline, all right? So there are ways in the chart that you can see this. That's by trying to find where the Capricorn placements and houses are, and you'll find that teaching through those aspects are a little bit easier because that is where we find our discipline in the chart. So hit me up if you want a birth chart read for your child, because knowing these sorts of things, particularly about children that can be quite repressive with their needs, is very important, all right? Now, another fun thing about a Gemini child brain is that they can actually learn a second language. This ability to exist in two parts of their mind at once can come in very handy. And so you're looking at from the ages of 2 or 3, a Gemini sun mind is quite open to learning a second language. So do take advantage of that, particularly if it's one that they have an interest in, because as I said earlier, if it's something they find great interest in, they will stick with it. Their curious mind will stick with it, all right? So the best way to educate the Gemini child is actually to come at it from being their friend. And by that, I mean like by sharing stories about your own life when you were their age. That is a really great way to educate them, because not only does it fulfills this need to get to know people on a number of levels, that talking to strangers kind of need. So they get to find out things about you that they wouldn't normally. And through that process, we can actually be educating them. All right. And we have to be teaching them about perseverance and patience as well. So stories about that from your childhood are also really good, but you will need to emphasize the goodness of the end goal when you're trying to teach perseverance to a Gemini. All right, do not underestimate the busyness of a Gemini child's brain, okay? And their intellect does tend to be quite submissive, and so you need to give them direction. This is another way that we can help teach them perseverance, okay? Because the knowledge that you're giving them needs to feel genuine, and it needs to feel of interest to them. Otherwise, they're just going to, go off in whatever direction the wind takes them. All right. Now, this is quite a cunning sign. Again, being able to see across polarities and exist in these emotional states backwards and forwards like twins, okay? They can learn to lie quite easily. And if you lose their confidence, they will hide the truth from you, okay? Because they will see it as pointless and of no interest that they speak the truth with you, all right? So it is very important, if you have a Gemini child, that you become the authority early on in their childhood so that you can maintain a spiritual, emotional, and mental connection with them. Because once you lose that, that is when they will start hiding the truth from you, okay? Now, Gemini being an air sign, if they do, one of the ways to help calm them and help connect them to their intuition is with air, okay? So talking, obviously, one of the ways, but also teaching them breath work can be very, very good, and getting them out in the fresh air, okay? A bit of a windy day, taking them out into the sunshine in a windy day, letting the air wash over them. I know it sounds mad. Teaching them some deep breaths, really excellent ways to help ground a Gemini child, okay? Now, because of this ability to exist in two polarities and shift between them very quickly, this is another thing that can be seen not as it is, as they have emotional overload, and sometimes it gets seen as just cheekiness or naughtiness. They can be seen as quite rude, and or that they can't choose a side because of this ability to shift from side to side. So part of how the Gemini learns is by trying to see all sides of the puzzle. So it may present that they can't make a decision that they don't want to choose, when in actual fact, they just need to know both parts of the information. So if you are telling them something and they are continuously questioning you and you are thinking you are being so rude, they actually need to know both sides. So this isn't the sort of child, I mean, none of them are really, but this in particular is not the sort of child that you can say, don't do that, and not give them a reason, or do that because I said so. Okay, you need to really be sure of the intended goal, and you need to be able to present your argument to a Gemini child, or they will be of no interest in what you're saying, okay? Now, this polarity existing also goes for the spiritual nature of a Gemini child, particularly a feminine energy Gemini child, because the feminine energy is very attached to intuition, very attached to its emotional nature. So when you are looking at spirituality in a Gemini child, you need to remember this ability to exist in both sides, okay? Because there is an ability for them to be able to cross from reality to delusion, okay? Very easily with that twin brain, okay? And Mercury rules Gemini, and that is an active mind sign. That is the give and take of information. That is how we best receive information and give information. And because of this active mind and the polarity that a Gemini has, there can be a realness to that slip into delusion. Because they have so much information, they can fill their brains with the truth and the illusion and everything. And when they're slipping backwards and forwards, some of the time that can create a confusion, all right? So a Gemini child who is shut down or stopped from communication or made to feel like their voice is a burden, they can very easily fall into a mental turmoil, all right? And they can become lost in there because they really need to speak to connect to their intuition. They really need to speak and understand the difference between illusion and reality. And if we leave them to their own self with no direction in thought and no one to bounce ideas off, it can really create a place of being lost inside of their mind. And as they progress, you know, we're thinking about, we may have seen that emotional overload as just being cheeky, and then they get into this place where they slip into that delusion space, and they can really feel like a burden if they talk inside of that, and then they get lost in that space. And it's very hard to unteach a lot of these things as they grow up. And I'm sure if you are a fully grown Gemini listening to this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So again, it's very important with a Gemini child that you build trust in communication inside of the relationship very early on, okay? If this child has a Lilith or a Chiron placement in Gemini, that can be very troublesome for a Gemini sun placement or even a Gemini moon placement, okay? And they need to be extra nurtured very carefully in relation to how they give and receive communication and how their communication is received by a caregiver. Very important when we are dealing with Geminis, all right? So if you are the caregiver of a small Gemini, I hope this was helpful. And we will be looking into Cancer child in the next episode. So until then, build that relationship with your Gemini as early as you can, okay? And teach them, as I always say, to stay weird.